My wife Sarah and I moved from London and bought an old Tudor-style house near Leicester in rural England. It was built in the 1890s and had plenty of character and charm, with enough room for the family we planned to start. We were overjoyed, a little wary of the house's age, but nothing a few repairs couldn't fix, we thought. We moved in late in the fall. The leaves were an autumn red and the house looked like something out of an oil painting with its old English Tudor charm. But within a few weeks we started to notice little odd things happening. It began with strange sounds. At first I thought it was just the house settling, old beams creaking in the night, or the heating system clicking on. Sarah joked that we had a friendly ghost because every time she set something down, a book, a cup, her phone, well, it would either move or end up somewhere else. One night, I was alone in the living room sorting through some boxes. Sarah had gone upstairs to unpack, and it was just me and the faint sound of her footsteps above. Suddenly I heard something else, a light, shuffling sound, like someone dragging their feet down the hallway. I looked up, expecting to see her coming down, but the hallway was empty. I shook it off, telling myself it was probably just the wind or an animal outside. But things escalated quickly. Sarah started waking up in the middle of the night, claiming she'd heard someone whispering in her ear. Sometimes it sounded like her name, other times just faint murmurs. She'd shake me awake, her face pale, insisting she wasn't dreaming. I'd searched the room, the hallway, and even checked the front door, but I never found anything. One evening, while Sarah was making dinner, she asked if I'd moved the painting that was leaning against the wall in the hallway. It was a large portrait of the house we'd found at an antique store, something we thought would be a nice touch. I hadn't moved it, but when I looked for it, I found it leaning up against the wall in one of the bedrooms upstairs. The next day, I decided to hang it up in the lounge room to be sure it didn't move again. Then came the night we just couldn't ignore. We were both asleep when I heard a loud echoing crash from downstairs. I jumped out of bed thinking maybe a shelf had fallen and rushed down, heart pounding. But when I turned on the lights, the room was eerily quiet. I checked every room on the ground floor and nothing was out of place. That's when I heard footsteps in the guest bedroom overhead, slow and heavy as if someone was walking deliberately from one side to the other. But I knew Sarah was in bed. I'd left her there. When I returned upstairs, Sarah was awake, sitting up, her face white as a sheet. She'd heard the footsteps too, and had felt a strange cold breeze, even though all the windows were closed. We sat there in silence, listening as the footsteps faded away, moving down the hallway. The next day, we relaxed beside the wood fire and tried to shake it all off, convincing ourselves it was all our imagination and that old houses could play tricks on people. But the next morning, Sarah found something on the dining room table, an old yellowed note written in faded ink. It was just a single sentence that read, "I never left." We didn't recognize the handwriting, and neither of us could explain where it had come from. It wasn't possible that it had been there all along. We'd unpacked and set up that table only a week before. That note sent chills through both of us, and we decided to ask around the neighborhood about the house's history.
An elderly neighbor told us a story. The house had belonged to a man named Henry Caldwell, a quiet recluse who'd lived there with his wife over a century ago. Henry's wife had died in the house under mysterious circumstances, and rumor had it she'd been very unhappy, isolated from the town, and kept in the house by her husband. People rarely saw her, and eventually, Henry himself disappeared. There were rumors that his spirit never left the house either, that he was still keeping watch over anyone who dared to live there.
That night, the atmosphere in the house felt oppressive. We couldn't relax, every creak and groan of the old structure setting us on edge. Finally, we fell asleep, but I awoke to see a dark, shadowy hand on my side of the bed. It began to get bigger as it moved closer and closer towards my face. I was paralyzed with fear and just closed my eyes and blanked out. I woke up the next morning in a cold sweat with just the memory of it. On another night, I saw a ghostly shadow at the foot of the bed. I couldn't move. Sarah lay beside me, breathing softly, unaware. The figure remained motionless for what felt like an eternity, before slowly turning and drifting out of the room, disappearing into the hallway. The next morning, I told Sarah what happened, and she became even more scared. We talked about what we should do to rid the house of this ghost. We decided to call for a priest to bless the house.
The next morning, we went to the local church and saw a priest by the name of Arthur, who arrived at our house later that day. We showed him the rooms of the house where most of the activity occurred, and he seemed confident that he could fix our problem. He then went to his car and grabbed a Bible and holy water. He then began by going into every room and praying. After each prayer, he would sprinkle holy water everywhere. When he finished, he said that if we still had problems to call him again, and he left.
A few months went by, and we were so relieved that things became normal again. We still had lots of things to do in the house, and when we weren't at work, we'd spend all our time working on the house. One day, Sarah was cleaning the basement and thought she heard a man's voice. She ran up the stairs into the house. I was outside doing some painting when I heard her calling out. She came running to me as white as a sheet. We knew then that something wasn't right again. That night, we both couldn't sleep very well when at 2 a.m. we heard noises downstairs, like the kitchen cupboards were being opened and slammed shut. That was followed by a loud thump, like something fell to the hardwood floor. We mustered up the courage to go downstairs. I led the way with a flashlight illuminating our way forward. As we got downstairs, the noises had stopped. We looked all through the kitchen and didn't find anything. Then I saw that old painting of the house lying face down on the floor. There was no way it could have fallen from the wall, as I'd put 2 large screws into the wall to hang it from. The wire attached to the back of the picture frame was not broken. From then on, we knew that this house wasn't going to give up haunting us. One night, I suddenly woke up to see the shadow of the ghost. Henry, I thought, on the foot of our bed. I was so mad, I said, "Leave us alone. What do you want?" The shadow replied slowly in a deep voice, "Get out of my house," whilst pointing toward the door. Sarah then woke up and saw the ghost. She screamed and became hysterical, so I calmed her down and we ended up on the couch downstairs the rest of the night. That was it. That morning we both decided to leave. We were not going to be bothered seeing the priest again. It was the final straw for both of us. We packed up our essentials, called a real estate agent, and listed the house for sale. A few days later, we moved in with Sarah's sister until the house was sold. To this day, I believe that Henry's ghost didn't want us living in the house. 5 years have passed since we left, and we recently found out from the real estate agent who sold the house that the people who purchased the house from us also sold it recently. I asked him why, but he didn't seem to know. I hope one day that any new owner finds peace there.